But so we were really lucky to have been able to have that whole conversation with him. And I mean, even just from beginning of knowing that, the 1964 Olympics happened in October 1964. And when we entered the Olympics, we entered as Northern Rhodesia. And the last day of the Olympics, the closing ceremony, was on the 24th of October, 1964. And of course, at midnight, we became the Republic of Zambia, and, we were no longer a British colony. And so we left the Olympics as Zambia, right? So even that transition, just shows just how much sport has been a part of our history. And then with Kenneth Kaunda talking about, one Zambia, one nation, and then referring to the football team. And as Dennis Luwewe says in 18, when Zambia is playing, there's no Lunda, there's no Nyanja, there's no Bemba, there's no Tonga, there's just one Zambia, one nation, right? The team was used to show that, we can come from all of these different places. We have 72 different ethnic groups, but when you put on the green jersey, you represent Zambia. And so that was a way to sort of show visually on a simple yet profoundly metaphoric level that, we can have our individual identities, but we can also have this collective identity as Zambia as we build. Just as the team works towards a goal, we are working towards becoming Zambia and developing our nation. And so the team was called KK11 up until the 90s when we became democratic. And as the 1993 Gabon air crash team was coming up, that's when we had the transition to Polo Polo, the Copper Bullets. And that team really was showing that we were reaching the heights that we wanted to reach, right? So we had a bit of a slump, economically, transitioning from the 70s to the 80s. AIDS had just started to ravage the country in the 90s, but the team was on the rise. And so that was giving us hope, saying, okay, we've transitioned to democracy. Yes, we may be, dealing with this disease, but, we have a plan to make things better. And so then when the team died so tragically and unexpectedly, on the way to achieving something that we really wanted, which was to qualify for the World Cup for the first time, it shook the nation. I remember it so vividly. We were living in Kenya at the time, but my dad knew every single person on that team, right? So he was devastated. It's one of the few times I really remember my father, crying, bawling like a baby. Because I mean, how do you deal with it? How do you deal with 20 plus people dying all at once? I just don't know. And so yeah, the country was decimated. We thought, this isn't going to happen. And even in filming it, when Kalusha was telling the story in the film, he's emotional enough where you can feel how devastating it was, because at one point he says, I just was like, it's over. We can't go on, where do we go from here, right? But it took us 4 days to shoot all of that because we had to stop and break. Everybody, I was the only woman on set, but this is how you know that this story is so human and it can touch anybody, right? Everybody was crying, and we'd have to stop and take breaks because it was just so much. And to this day, Kalusha has not watched the film because he's just even just the filming of it traumatized him because it was a lot. I mean, he talks about looking behind at the new team and he didn't see his friends. I mean, but he just had to carry on and be a leader. I don't even know how you overcome that, as a person being so close to that. And then, us as a nation, us being able to overcome that showed that yes, we've had trials and tribulations. Yes, things may be going south. Yes, things aren't going quite the way we wanted, but we can bounce back. And that's how we ended up, in the final in 1994, a year later. And so when things like that happen, that's when Zambians remember that they're, resilient, that they have the Tamanga spirit, that they can, find a way to get things done despite everything that's going on. And then, you know, in the early 2000s, basically when everything was just going down. So socioeconomically, politically, the team was reflecting that as well. And so, you know, football is just a really good way of gauging where the country is. And then, the transition of power in 2011, and everybody thought that would make the difference. And that was reflected in our win in 2012. Because there was no way that we should have won that. We went up against two of the best teams in Africa who had made it to the World Cup multiple times, you know, Ghana and Ivory Coast, with some of the best players in the world playing in the biggest leagues. But we somehow managed, because we just knew that if we're focused, we know who we are, we know what we have to offer. But then the decline of the team right after that also then reflected the leadership that we had, because there was a lot of interference. And when I was interviewing the team a year later in South Africa, when they were preparing for a World Cup qualifier, I didn't get to speak to Calabar. He hid in the hotel for 2 days. Nobody could find him. And I almost didn't get Mayuka, who scored the winning goal against Ghana when he came on within a minute of him coming on in the second half, because the country was in a state of confusion and didn't realize that it had to do with the leadership. We only realized recently, hence the change in regime now, and that was reflected in the team, because so many people were trying to get theirs. So instead of it being about the team and about continuing to build, everybody was just trying to grab everything that they could. And, you know, the players felt used, abused, or neglected. But, you know, I just told them, like, I just want to know what football means to you. I want to know what you were thinking when you were called up on the 62nd minute and you scored in the 63rd. I want to know, you know, what was going on behind the scenes to get you pumped up. You know, what were you thinking about? Were you thinking about Zambia? You know, Kennedy Mwene, the goalkeeper, talks about, you know, we're ambassadors. We know we're ambassadors for the country. So how we perform reflects on who we are as a people, and it's a great way for people to know about who we are as Zambians. You know, they also understood the gravity of the 1993 Gabon air disaster, and knew that however they played, it should honor, you know, the ancestors. You know, and we're very traditional. And then the spiritual element of it, you know, we're a Christian nation. You know, they sang, you know, that funeral song to sort of remind them of, you know, the gravity of the situation. So, yeah, that all came out. And I mean, I can't really say anything now, but like my next project is actually sort of dealing with how, you know, the football is so much more than a sport, and how that reflects in Zambia in particular through football, and that's all I can say. But yeah, I don't know when this project will be done, but you might start hearing about stuff about that in the coming months when I'm more at liberty to speak about it. But yeah, it really is. Football always brings us together, and that's the most important thing. So even though, like, we may go through these lulls in with the team, people always look to football to right things. They know that when the football is right, we as a people are right. And I think that is now starting to reflect in the women's team. And so there's a call for investment in the women's team in the same way that we've invested in the men's team, because, you know, once again at the Olympics this year, we had Barbara Banda, you know, set a new record. She scored 2 hat tricks in you know, in 2 games, and even though we didn't get out of the, you know, the qualifying rounds, the impact that we made was the same sort of impact that our golden team in 1988 did at the Olympics. And I think that's also a reflection of society right now, how women are stepping into their power, how women are saying, you know, all these doors that have been closed to us, we are, you know, throwing them wide open. If you don't make a seat at the table for us, we're making our own seat. And I think the team really reflects that, not only the way that they play, in the way that they present themselves, in the way that they do work outside of the pitch. So yes, I think that football has and continues to reflect what's going on in Zambian society, and is a space of leadership as well.